What's up, guys? Redcon 1 head trainer Joe Bennett. Just giving you a little info on the topic of HIIT versus steady state. So specifically, one, just some info you could take away if you're just trying to get lean, but also really specifically geared towards competitors. There's a lot of pretty proven benefits to HIIT, meaning that there's proven that you're going to have more metabolic impact from it, meaning not just what calories are you burning when you're doing it, but what kind of impact you're going to have in your metabolic output the entire rest of the day. It's pretty definitive that research shows that you're going to have a much larger metabolic impact doing HIIT. There's also the thought process that HIIT will also correlate and translate to training performance a lot more. So meaning your HIIT training will help improve your endurance when you're actually doing your resistance training as well too. So what's really the concern? A lot of people think, you hear coaches say that, well, it's too taxing on recovery, it's too taxing on the central nervous system. In reality, there's nothing taxing on your central nervous system, and that's a fallacy altogether. As far as recovery goes, if you're doing the right type of HIIT, it shouldn't be that taxing on your recovery, and I'll elaborate a little bit. Pretty much the only rule that I'll say that you want to follow is what your glycogen levels are at. If you're in a very, very depleted state, glycogen levels are constantly being emptied, you're going through a lot of high and low days, or you're just very depleted for a long period of time, that may be one of the few cases where HIIT does not have merit. Or if your glycogen is so low that essentially you want to save it, and not deplete it and have it for your resistance training. So again, when that point comes, it's kind of different for everyone's prep. If you're cycling your carbs, it might be to the point where, well, after coming off of a high day, you might be able to do HIIT, and when you're coming into your lower days, you need to go a little bit more to steady state. So that's probably the biggest golden rule that you can kind of apply is just looking at glycogen levels, not necessarily recovery, not necessarily as, am I getting enough sleep, or all the things that kind of go into the recovery component. Just more so, again, is do you or do you not have a lot of glycogen? As far as the recovery standpoint, if you're doing the right type of HIIT, it should not be taxing on your recovery. The right type of HIIT would be something called concentric only training, or concentric only HIIT. Which is a cool name someone made up. If you understand the concentric and eccentric portion of an exercise, basically concentric, if you're bench pressing, is the way up. The eccentric is kind of that load or that impact type thing. So concentric only forms, probably the three most common versions or easiest versions that you can do anywhere would be some sort of spin bike, some sort of prowler or sled push, or some sort of high incline hill sprint. And all that means, if you think about a spin bike, you're constantly just pressing. It's just repetitive concentric, concentric, concentric. There's no impact or loading phase. The same thing with the prowler. It's just one step after another after another. There's really no impact as far as the load's concerned. You just plant a foot and you drive through concentrically. And same thing with a hill. You're stride up. You're not having any of your load. It's a stride up a hill, and then you're concentrically pulling your body up past that point. Why is that important? Well, one, the concentric portion of the exercise is the part that's the most energy expenditure. So again, even when you're bench pressing, it's a lot more energy expenditure on the way up than it is on the way down. So one, from an output standpoint, from a metabolic standpoint, you want a lot of just concentric contractions over and over and over and over at a high level of intensity, and you're going to have huge bang for your buck for the amount of time that you're doing it. The other concern is the eccentric is the most damaging on the muscle. So literally, like the lowering phase, again, for that bench press analogy, is actually where you incur the most muscle damage, which when you're training is good. Obviously you want to focus on that with the resistance training. The idea is to grow muscle or put yourself in a place where you have the opportunity to grow muscle post-training. As far as HIIT's concerned, you don't want that. That's where it could be saying that it's hard or it's taxing on recovery. So again, examples, you might not want to just do like sprints on a treadmill or plyometrics or things like that, something where there is a lot of an eccentric phase and could be taxing on your muscles, could be taxing on your recovery. Then as far as how are you doing it, what duration are you doing it, what intensity are you doing it, ideally you want it as intense as possible and as short as possible. I say you really want to be hitting failure around 15 to 20 seconds. So meaning if you're on a spin bike, if you hit a sprint, you have the intensity cranked up and you're going as fast as you can, your legs should be no longer able to turn over those pedals for 15 or 20 seconds. It's not necessarily that doing it longer for that is bad and having a little bit more recovery bad. It's just that's going to have, again, the most bang for your buck for the time frame. And honestly, at that point in time, you get some of the benefits of like resistance training, where again, it's not going to be such a long duration thing that's just extended catabolic, a lot of cortisol being built up over time. You can even have the possibility of a good hormone balance afterwards. So it's one of those things where you just have to know the concepts, you have to know the time and the place to apply it, and which is more beneficial when. As far as how often and how many intervals, in reality, that's something that can just change basically as you go through your prep. So it might be a variable that you progress or regress if it's a little bit too much, meaning maybe you have 3 or 4 or 5 intervals to start, and as you need more output, more of a caloric deficit, you just add or increase intervals. And then the only other component really to consider necessarily is what do you like? So when I say that, meaning some people, if you don't like it because it's hard, that's one thing. But some people just hate specific types of cardio. So this is knowing yourself and having good communication with your coach. There's no reason anyone has to do one specific thing. Again, I just listed 3 decent options as far as what you could do for HIIT. If there's one you prefer, stick with that. And then the same thing, steady state has a place. It's never really wrong to do steady state, especially if it's something you like. So honestly, one of the downfalls of steady state, if you're doing an elliptical at a moderate intensity for 60 minutes, or you're walking at a fast pace on a treadmill, is the idea that you're producing a lot of cortisol just kind of over a long duration period of time, and potentially too much cortisol could have an inverse effect on what you want to do with lean muscle mass and even potentially for fat burning. But if it's an activity you like, it's actually been shown that can reduce cortisol. So a lot of people, honestly, if they just walk outside, if they go for a hike, if they do something literally that they don't mind as much, it can actually have some beneficial effects on your cortisol. So again, that's just a couple key points to go through as far as, again, the take home is you can use both. There's a time and a place for HIIT. There's a time and a place for steady state. It's just a matter of knowing how to do both and when is the best time for each.